A pallet of pressurized or canisters broke free from a snapped harness and hit the floor of docking ring 7 like a small explosion. The canisters were heavy, each one close to 40 kilos, and they scattered across the bay floor in every direction. Workers jumped back. An alien dockhand from the Kethari species pressed himself flat against a support column. Two human loaders ran sideways. Overseer Bren, a wide bovine-looking alien with gray skin and a clipboard he never actually used, made a sound like a foghorn and raised both arms. Nobody moved toward the canisters. Nobody except the new girl. She was already moving before the last canister stopped rolling. Short, compact, with dark hair pulled back tight and arms that looked like they had been carved rather than grown. She stepped into the spread of rolling metal with no hesitation at all, stopped the first canister with her foot, kicked it sideways against the wall, then dropped her weight onto the second one before it could reach the pressurized fuel line running along the east wall. She caught the third with both hands, held it, set it down. The fourth had rolled under a loader bed. She reached under, grabbed it, pulled it out with one arm. Then she stood up, brushed her hands on her work pants, and looked at Overseer Bren. "Harness clip is cracked," she said. "Left side mount. Should replace the whole bracket, not just the clip." Bren stared at her for a moment. Then he looked down at the work papers in his actual hands. He did carry physical paper, despite everything, and read the line he had already read twice that morning. Caro 4. Place of origin. Caro 4. He had worked this dock for 11 years. In that time, 3 workers from Caro 4 had passed through. All 3 had been quietly extraordinary and deeply uninterested in discussing it. This one appeared to be continuing the tradition. "Noted," he said. "Get the replacement bracket from storage locker 9. You know where that is?" "I'll find it," she said and walked off. Up on the upper gantry, where the freight brokers kept their office windows overlooking the bay floor, Rail Dorn watched all of this with his coffee going cold in his hand. He was a big man. Broad shoulders, thick neck, the kind of build that comes from years of actual physical work rather than any deliberate effort. He had spent 8 years on deep colony mining platforms before moving into freight brokerage, and he had never quite stopped carrying himself like the biggest thing in the room. Usually, on Cala Station's docking ring 7, that was more or less accurate. His friend Doss stood next to him, watching the same scene. "Caro 4, Doss said, reading from a new hire posting on his datapad. "That's the one with the I know what it is," Rail said. He did not actually know much about it. He knew the name. He had heard alien dock workers mention it in low voices the way people mention whether they have survived. He had always assumed it was exaggerated. He looked down at the girl. Sura, the posting said, just Sura, now walking back from storage locker 9 carrying a bracket that usually required 2 people to move. She was carrying it in one hand. "Small," Rail said. Doss said nothing. "For a big reputation," Rail added, louder now, loud enough that it carried. He was not trying to be cruel exactly. He was performing. He had an audience of 2, which had always been enough for him. Down on the floor, Sura glanced up at the gantry. Just once. Her face showed nothing at all. Not anger, not embarrassment, not amusement. She looked at him the way a person looks at a piece of equipment they have already assessed and set aside. Then she looked back down and kept walking. Rail took a sip of cold coffee. He told himself she had not heard. Bren had heard. 2 Kethari dock workers had heard. The alien who had pressed himself against the column. A thin, multi-jointed creature named Vostat Benz, who had worked Ring 7 for longer than Bren, had definitely heard. He watched Rail for a moment with his wide amber eyes. Then he turned back to his work without a word. The shift ran for another 4 hours. In that time, Sura replaced the bracket, resecured the pallet, unloaded a mid-class freighter that had come in from the outer belt, and noted 2 other maintenance issues in the bay that had apparently gone unreported for weeks. She did all of this without being asked to do more than the first task. When the shift ended, Rail came down from the gantry and cut through the workers' corridor toward the transit hub. Sura was ahead of him, gear bag over one shoulder. He could have said nothing. He knew, even then, that saying nothing was the better choice. But there was something about her stillness that bothered him in a way he could not explain and bothered things that always made him talk. "Caro 4, he said to her back. "Must feel soft here. After all that." She stopped walking. He thought, for a moment, that she was going to turn around. She did not. She stood still for exactly 2 seconds. Then she kept walking. Rail watched her go. Doss appeared at his shoulder. "Stop," Doss said quietly. "I'm just talking." "I know," Doss said. "Stop anyway." Rail did not understand why his friend looked so uncomfortable. He figured Doss was being careful about nothing, the way Doss sometimes was. He was wrong about that. The canteen on level 4 smelled like fried grain and recycled air, the same as every worker's canteen on every station Rail had ever visited. The tables were bolted to the floor, the lights were too bright, and the food was the kind of thing that kept a body running without ever making it happy about the arrangement. Rail liked it anyway. He liked the noise, the crowding, the mix of species all doing the same basic thing, eating fast and looking tired. It reminded him that the galaxy, for all its variety, mostly ran on the same fuel as he did: fatigue and hunger and the small relief of sitting down. He claimed the corner table as he always did, Doss across from him, 2 Kethri freight handlers nearby, eating something that smelled like wet grass. A younger human worker named Bilt sat at the end, not saying much, which was his usual contribution to any gathering. Rail told the story about the fight on Station Durin. He had told it before, but he told it well, and the details had improved naturally over the years the way details do when nobody is keeping records. By now the other man was larger, and the odds were worse, and Rail's exit from the whole situation was considerably more graceful than it had actually been. The Kethri workers did not react. Kethri rarely did. But Bill grinned, and Doss had heard it enough times that he smiled in the right places for memory, and that was enough. Across the room, Sura sat by herself at a small table near the wall. She had a tray of food that she was eating steadily without looking up, and a data pad propped against her water cup that she read between bites. She was not making herself invisible. She was genuinely not paying attention to anything in the room, which was somehow more noticeable than if she had been staring at the walls. One of the Kethri workers glanced at her, then back at Rail. Something passed across his broad, flat face that was not quite an expression, more like the absence of one. Rail was deep into his second story, this one about a cargo dispute on a deep belt mining rig, when the question of hard places came up naturally. He said, as he often did, that Durin station off the 4th ring was the roughest post he had ever pulled. Honestly brutal, he said. The kind of place that aged a man. Not like Caro 4, the Kethri worker said, quietly, not arguing, just stating. Rail looked at him. What? Caro 4, the Kethri said again. It is not comparable to a trade station. Caro 4 is, he paused, choosing the word carefully, a different category. It's a planet, Rail said. A rough one. I've heard the stories. Stories do not carry the full weight, the Kethri said, and went back to his food in a way that clearly communicated he was not going to say more. Rail looked across the room at Sura, still reading her datapad. He felt something then that he did not identify correctly. He thought it was skepticism. It was actually the first small touch of something that should have become caution, but didn't because he redirected it before it could settle. Alien propaganda, he said, dropping his voice in a way that was still clearly meant to carry. Make humans from hard places sound like something special. Good for morale, I suppose. He looked at Sura again. She had still not looked up. He did the worst thing he could have done then, which was perform for the table because the table was watching. He flexed one arm, broad and genuine, then pointed across the room at Sura with an exaggerated look of mock fear. A joke. A piece of theater that said, "This is what we are supposedly afraid of." Bilt laughed. It was a nervous laugh, but it was a laugh. The Kethri worker picked up his tray and moved 2 tables away. He did it without hurry or comment, the way a person moves when they no longer want to be near something. His companion followed. Doss did not laugh. Doss put down his fork. Across the room, Sura finally looked up. She looked at Rail for exactly the amount of time it took to understand what she was seeing. Then she looked back down at her datapad. She finished her food. She stacked her tray, stood up, and carried it to the return window without a word or a look in his direction. An older alien dock worker, the multi-jointed one, Voss that bends, watched her leave. Then he looked at Rail with his amber eyes for a moment before he too stood and carried his tray away. "You need to stop," Doss said. "It's a joke. It's not landing like one." Rail looked around. The Kethri were gone. Vostat Binz was gone. Bilt was looking at the table. The canteen had not gone quiet. It was a loud place, but something in the corner of it had shifted, the way a temperature shifts in a room before anyone admits it is cold. "She doesn't care," Rail said. Doss picked up his fork again, but did not eat. "That's the part one think you've got wrong." "Which part?" "The part where not reacting means she doesn't care." He paused. "Or the part where not caring is the same as not noticing." Rail had no answer for that, so he finished his food and talked about something else, and the moment passed the way moments do when a person chooses to let them. But Doss was quiet the rest of the evening, and that stayed with Rail longer than he wanted it to. The maintenance corridor behind Docking Ring 7 was the kind of place that existed on every station but that nobody talked about. It was functional and ugly. Bare conduit pipes running overhead, wall panels that had been opened and reclosed so many times the edges no longer sat flush, lighting strips that flickered at one end where a power relay needed work. Workers used it as a shortcut between the dock floor and the transit hub because it cut 3 minutes off the walk. 3 minutes mattered at the end of a double shift. Rail used it that evening because his legs were tired and his mood was flat in the specific way it gets when a day has not gone badly, but has not gone well either. He had a cargo dispute sitting in his inbox that he did not want to think about, and the cold coffee from the morning had given him a headache that had stayed quietly behind his eyes all day. He had not been drinking heavily. 2 drinks at the dock level bar, which for him was barely a threshold. Enough to smooth the edges, not enough to make him stupid. Or so he told himself. He was about a third of the way down the corridor when he saw Sura ahead of him. She was crouched next to a wall relay panel, not the one that needed work at the far end, but a different one closer to the midpoint. She had the panel face off and was checking something inside with a small hand light. Her back was to him. Rail slowed down. He did not plan what happened next. That was the truth of it, and he would say so later, and it would be accurate. He did not think, "I will grab her shoulder and spin her around." He thought something much smaller than that. A flicker of the same performance instinct that had made him point at her in the canteen, the same low habit of prodding at things that were quiet to see what sound they made. He was going to grab her shoulder, turn her, say something stupid and grinning, and walk on. A joke, the kind of thing that dissolves in a second and is forgotten in 10. He reached out and grabbed her shoulder. What happened next took less time than it takes to say it. She moved, not startled, not panicked, something far older than either of those things. Her body was already turning before the signal from his hand had finished traveling to her brain, a deep rotation, weight dropping, one hand coming up and catching his wrist. There was a motion after that which Rail's eyes did not fully track, something that involved his own momentum being used against him, his arm being directed into an angle that arms do not go. He heard a sound. He did not immediately understand that the sound was coming from him. Then the floor was against his cheek, and there was a kind of pain in his wrist and hand that was so far outside his experience that for a moment his mind simply refused to file it correctly. It was not the pain of something bruised. It was the pain of something reorganized. He could not move. Not because she was holding him down. She had already stepped back, but because his arm was sending signals his body had no response to. He lay still. The flickering light at the end of the corridor went on flickering. Sura stood 2 steps away from him. She was breathing normally. She looked at him on the floor with an expression that was not anger and was not satisfaction. It was the expression of a person whose hands have done something automatic and who is now fully present and understanding what that means. Her face was very calm. Her eyes were not. She looked at his wrist. She already knew what she would see. "Can you move your fingers?" she asked. He tried. The attempt made the pain worse. He made a sound he had never made before. "Don't," she said quietly. "Stop trying." She was already reaching for her comm unit. He heard her voice clearly, even through the noise filling his head. She gave their location and described the injury with words he did not recognize. Medical words, or maybe technical ones, the specific language of someone who has been trained to report exactly this kind of thing. Then she clipped the comm unit back to her belt and crouched down to his level, not touching him, just close enough that he could focus on her face. "Stay still," she said. "Medical is on the way." He found his voice somewhere underneath the pain. You grabbed me from behind," she said, "in a dark corridor. My body answered before I did." She paused. "I'm sorry you're hurt. I need you to know that I did not choose this." He did not say anything. He was not sure he could form the right words. Dawes came around the far corner of the corridor 40 seconds later. He had been following the same shortcut at a slower pace. He came around the bend and stopped. He looked at Rail on the floor. He looked at Sura standing beside him. He looked at the angle of Rail's arm. Dawes had grown up on a standard colony world where the hardest thing he had ever faced was a contract dispute. He had no frame for what he was seeing except the obvious one. He said nothing. He walked over, crouched down, and put one hand on Rail's shoulder, the other shoulder the uninjured one. The medical team arrived in 4 minutes. Sura was still there when they came. She had not moved. Physician Arata had been working the station medical bay for 6 years. And in that time, she had treated broken bones, punctured things, crushed things, burns from 3 different chemical sources, and one incident involving a Kethri worker and a cargo loader that she still did not fully understand mechanically. She was insectoid in structure, with 4 thin arms and a face built for precision rather than expression, and she did her work with the quiet thoroughness of someone who had decided long ago that feelings about an injury were less useful than correct information about it. She examined Rail's wrist and hand for 11 minutes. She set 2 fingers, rotated the wrist joint back in a place with a motion that made Rail go white, and applied a regenerative wrap that would begin the bone repair process over the next several days. When she was finished, she stood back and looked at him. 3 weeks minimum, she said. Reduced grip strength for 2 months following that. Do not use this hand for load-bearing work during recovery. Rail stared at the wrapped hand. The pain had been managed with a local block that made everything below his elbow feel distant and heavy. Can you do better than 3 weeks? No, she said. This is already better than the injury warranted. You were fortunate the joint did not separate further. She made a note on her record pad. I have seen this type of wrist injury before. It is characteristic of a specific grappling response used in high-gravity environments. She said it without any particular inflection. Just information. Rail said nothing. The person who did this, Orada continued, would have been applying a reflex grip technique. The kind of thing that is trained into the body rather than chosen in the moment. She capped her stylus. It is not designed to injure. It is designed to break a hold. The injury is a consequence of resistance, not intent. She left him with that and moved on to her next patient. The review took place in Station Admiral HEV's chamber the following morning. HEV was old. That was the first thing most people noticed. He was Kethri, which meant broad and heavy-boned, but age had settled him down into a lower, denser version of the species, his scales gone from dark green to a gray-brown that matched the station walls. He had reviewed disputes on Kala Station for 19 years. His eyes, set wide in a flat face, had the quality of things that had seen most of what the galaxy produced and were no longer impressed by any of it. He let Rail speak first. Rail spoke for some time. He covered the corridor, the time of evening, the angle of the lighting. He said the attack was unprovoked. He used that word 3 times, unprovoked. HEV did not interrupt. Then he asked Sura to speak. Sura stood straight, hands loose at her sides, and said the following. She had been checking the relay panel. She had been grabbed from behind in a poorly lit corridor. Her body had responded to the contact before she had made a decision. The response was a standard close-quarters reflex trained into all workers from Caro 4 beginning in childhood, because Caro 4 had predatory fauna that took workers from behind without warning. She was sorry for the extent of the injury. She had not tried to cause it. She said all of this without drama and without apology for anything beyond the injury itself. HEV looked at her for a moment. Then he turned to the wall panel behind his desk and pulled up the corridor sensor log. The corridor had 2 passive sensors, neither of them cameras, just motion and contact readers. The log showed 2 individuals, their positions, and a contact event. The contact event showed clearly who had moved toward whom and where the initial physical touch had originated. HEV looked at Rail. What did you believe would happen he said, when you grabbed a Caro 4 worker from behind in a corridor with failing light. Rail opened his mouth. He found nothing useful inside it. HEV did not wait. He turned to the 3 station officials seated along the wall, 2 humans and 1 Ketheri, and spoke for several minutes about Caro 4. He explained the gravity at 1.6 standard. He explained the radiation index and what it did to the nervous system over generations. He explained the fauna and the specific type of response training that every Caro 4 worker received as a condition of surface employment. The 2 human officials listened with expressions that indicated this was new information to them. The Ketheri official had been sitting with his eyes closed. He did not open them. He already knew all of it. Das was called as a witness. He told the truth in a flat voice, looking at neither Rail nor Sura. He said Rail had reached out and grabbed the worker's shoulder from behind. He said Sura had not moved toward Rail at any point before or after. He said he was sorry it happened. HEV's ruling came quickly. Rail had initiated unlawful physical contact. Sura had responded with a conditioned reflex. No charges would be filed against her. Rail would pay a station conduct fine and serve a 1-month review period during which any further contact incidents would result in reassignment. Rail sat with it. He could feel the wrapped hand in his lap, heavy and absent and completely his own fault. The room felt smaller than it had when he walked in. Not because of the ruling, because of the faces of the 2 human officials on the panel who had not known about Caro 4 and who were now looking at him the way people look at a person who broke something he should have known not to touch. The first 3 days after the review, Rail stayed in his quarters more than he usually did. He told himself it was because the hand needed rest. That was partly true. The regenerative wrap required limited movement, and the local block had worn off, leaving a deep ache that made concentration difficult. He had paperwork he could do one-handed, cargo manifests and routing disputes that only needed a functioning data pad and a working eye. He did the paperwork, and between documents, he watched. His quarters had a narrow window that looked down into docking ring 7. Not a good view, too steep an angle, too much gantry framework in the way, but enough to see the floor. He had never paid much attention to it before. The dock was background noise, something that happened below him while he worked. Now he watched Sura. He watched her the way he had not watched her before, which was to say actually watching instead of performing an opinion about what he was seeing. He watched how she moved from task to task without being redirected, how she picked up problems that were not assigned to her, because she had seen them and the seeing was apparently enough. He watched her carry loads. He knew the weight ratings on the standard cargo units from years of brokerage work, and when he mentally matched what she was moving to those ratings, he stopped doing it because the result was uncomfortable. He watched the other workers around her. That was the thing he had missed entirely. He had looked at Sura and seen a person alone, eating alone, working without a crowd. What he had not seen, what he understood now, with the unhurried attention of someone who has nothing else to do, was how the other workers arranged themselves on the floor when she was present. Not because they were following her, not consciously, but the Ketheri workers drifted toward her side of the bay during heavy lifts. Vostat bands consistently took up positions that left her a clear path to exits. It was not protective, exactly. It was more like how people on a ship in rough weather naturally move toward the most stable part of the hull. They knew what she was. He had not. On the 4th day, Das came by with food and the kind of expression that meant he had been thinking about whether to say something and had decided he would. "There's a story going around the dock," Das said. He sat down and set the containers on the table. About 3 months ago, before Sura's rotation here, she was on loading contract at Ring 4. A loader arm snapped its upper mount, the big ones, the overhead lifters. Full arm coming down, somewhere around 2 tons, moving fast. Rail looked at him. 2 Ketheri workers underneath it, Das said. She got one shoulder under the arm. Held it. He paused. Long enough for both of them to clear. The dock crew said about 4 seconds. Rail said nothing. She cracked 3 ribs and sheared a shoulder muscle. She finished the shift. Das opened his food. Did not report the injury until the shift ended because she did not want to leave the dock understaffed. They ate for a while without speaking. Rail looked at his wrapped hand. What's wrong with her shoulder now? Nothing. Doss said. It healed. Caro, 4 bone density. Their repair rate is also accelerated. Something to do with the radiation exposure over generations, pushing faster cellular response. He shrugged. I looked it up. Rail had not looked it up. He could have at any point. He had not. I need to talk to her, he said. Yes, Doss said simply. I don't know what to say. Start with what's true and see what comes after. He found her the next morning on the dock floor, an hour into the early shift. She was working a pallet of sealed equipment crates, checking seals and logging them. He walked across the floor and stopped a couple of meters from her. She saw him coming and waited, her posture giving nothing away. He did not prepare a speech. He had thought about it the previous night and decided that anything prepared would come out sounding like a performance, and he had done enough of that. I was wrong to grab you, he said. That's first. I was wrong to touch you without asking. I was wrong about Caro 4. I didn't know what I was talking about, and I said things like I did. He looked at the hand, still wrapped, still aching. I'm not telling you that because I want anything from you. I needed to say it where you could hear it. Sura looked at him for a moment. She looked at the hand. I know you didn't mean to lose the use of it, she said. I didn't mean to take it. A beat. I'm sorry for the injury. I have been since it happened. I know, he said. Arata told me. The type of reflex it was. She nodded. There was a small silence that was not hostile, just 2 people standing in it. Then she picked up one of the smaller equipment crates from the pallet and held it out to him. It was manageable one-handed. 30 kilos, maybe a little more. Crate 9 goes to storage unit 4 on the east wall, she said. If you're not busy. He took the crate with his good arm. It was heavier than she had made it look. East wall, he said. East wall, she confirmed, and turned back to her manifest. He carried the crate to the east wall. We came back. She handed him another without looking up. He did not mind that. 6 weeks after the corridor incident, a new posting cycle brought fresh workers to Cala Station's docking rings. They came in groups off the mid-range transit liners, contract workers from colony worlds, a few from Earth's outer settlements, some from industrial platforms who had rotated out for reassignment. Most of them were competent. Some of them were loud about it in the way that young workers are loud about competence before they have been anywhere long enough to know what they don't know. One of them, a human worker named Jairus, came from a station called Halden Point, which had a reputation in certain docking circles as a tough post. He was not a bad worker. He was large, confident, and carried with him the easy authority of someone who had always been the most capable person in whatever room he was standing in, and who had not yet found a room that changed that. He found docking ring 7 on his second day. The first thing he saw when he walked in was the new heavy rotation team running a lift drill on the west end of the floor. 3 Kethri and 1 human running through load transfers on the big overhead units. The human was Sura. The drill was running fast because she had set the pace. Jairus watched for a moment. Then he said to the man standing next to him, one of the regular Kethri workers named Brell, something about how the drill looked like it was running faster than it needed to. Brell looked at him, said nothing. Then Jairus said, in a voice that carried, that he had heard Caro 4 workers had a reputation, and he wondered how much of it was real and how much was the kind of thing people said when they wanted to seem impressive on a nothing posting. Brell took 1 step sideways, away from him, and looked at the middle distance. Jairus did not notice. He added something about the human woman's size and whether that matched the story, and then he laughed at his own comment, a short sound that did not find any echo in the people around him. Rail had come in through the ring's east entrance 2 minutes earlier. He had not been looking for anything in particular. A cargo routing issue had brought him down from the gantry office. He heard the voice and recognized the shape of it without needing to process the words. He had used that voice himself. He crossed the floor. He did not hurry and he did not make it a scene. He walked up beside Jairus, who was still watching the drill with an expression of mild amusement, and he stopped there and said nothing for a moment. Jairus noticed him and nodded the way workers nod at other workers, a brief acknowledgement, nothing more. First week, Rail said. Second day, Jairus said. Rail nodded. He looked at the drill. Sura was working the far end of a horizontal beam transfer, taking weight at her station as the load swung across. From this distance, she looked exactly the size she was, which was not large. Caro 4, Rail said, is 1.6 standard gravity. Has been for the full record of human settlement there. 6 generations now. He kept his voice level, the way a person talks when they're explaining something rather than arguing. The radiation index is 3 times what most colony health standards allow. The surface predators hunt in low light and they take workers from behind, so every surface employee trains close quarters response from the time they can walk. He paused. The workers it produces have bone density that won't show on a standard scan because the standard equipment is calibrated for normal ranges. Their grip force is in a different category. Their reaction time is faster than most species in this station's workforce. He paused again, and they are quiet about it, which I spent a long time mistaking for something it was not. Jarrus had stopped watching the drill. He was watching Rail instead. Rail held up his right hand. The wrap was off, but the hand was still slightly thickened at the wrist, the remnants of the injury visible if you knew what you were looking at. I grabbed her from behind in a corridor 6 weeks ago, he said. As a joke. He let Jarrus look at the hand. Her reflex did that in about 1 second. She had already called medical before I finished hitting the floor. Jarrus said nothing. She also held a 2-ton loader arm on one shoulder for 4 seconds to clear 2 workers underneath it, Rail added. 3 cracked ribs. She finished the shift. Silence. Rail let it sit for a moment. Then he said, "The station is full of things that are extraordinary and don't announce it. You'll do better here if you learn to see them before you give them a reason to show you." He walked back toward the east entrance, the cargo routing issue still waiting in his inbox. On the floor, the drill finished its cycle. Sura checked the load readings on her station panel, noted them in her log, and said something to the Kethri worker on her left that made him produce a sound that might have been a laugh. Then she moved on to the next task without looking up. Doss caught up with Rail at the east entrance. He had been watching from nearby. "How'd that feel?" Doss said. Rail considered it. His hand ached in the cold, recycled air of the corridor, a dull reminder he had stopped resenting and started treating as information. "Like something I should have done 6 weeks ago," he said. In reverse. They went back to work. The station hummed around them, indifferent and enormous, full of quiet things.